Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Money Monday. It's 8:58. We're going to get started in a couple minutes, so come on in, get settled. Tonight we're going to be talking about renting versus owning. I'm Nakia. I'll be delivering this content to you tonight, so come on in. We'll start promptly at 9 o'clock. And let me make sure I have all my ducks in a row. Let's see. So yeah, hopefully this week has started off good for you all, not stressful like some people. Yeah, but I'm excited to share this content, especially now, even though I know interest rates are very high right now, I still think that there's a blessing and beauty in owning versus renting. But I'm going to give you both tonight. So we'll be talking about pros and cons. I'll tell you if you indications that you should or should not rent or own, and then we'll talk about the cost summary. So let's give everybody a chance to come in. Let me see who I have in here. I see somebody, but I don't see who you are. Let's see what happens. Let me not touch it. Welcome to Money Monday. We're going to leave it as is. Give me some hearts or something so I can see who's in here, who we have on tonight. Hey, Candy. Glad to see you. I told you I'd be back this week. Last week was the holiday, so I took a day off. I had a cheat day. So happy to be back. Thanks for joining. We'll get started in one more minute. Let's give people a chance to get on. Okay, it's 9 o'clock, so we're going to get started, and then people can trickle on as they come, as they are available or what have you. So once again, welcome to Money Monday. Tonight we're talking about renting versus owning. First, I'll run through some pros and cons of each. I'll give you indications of should you rent or should you own, what that looks like if you're in a good space. I'll give you kind of like a mini checklist, and then I'll give you a cost summary so you can kind of see how renting versus owning matches up. Okay, so let's dive in. We'll start with renting. Now, as I said, as with anything, there are pros and cons to everything you do, right? It's always going to be a pro. It's always going to be a con. But what you have to focus on is if those pros outweigh the cons, right? So when you're renting, there are pros and cons. You have less responsibility than you would have if you were owning. You're not responsible for repairs. It can be cheaper for you, especially depending on where you live. You have flexibility. So if you want to move or you like to change spaces frequently, you have a lot of flexibility with that, but not so much flexibility when it comes to tailoring your space to what you like. So if you want to paint a wall or you want to rehab anything or knock something down, that's not really allowed when you're renting. But you don't have a long-term commitment. You typically don't have property tax or homeowners insurance unless your landlord is passing those costs on to you. The thing with renting, however, is your rent can potentially increase. And so we've been seeing that a lot right now, especially after the pandemic, when so many people weren't paying their rent. I don't know if the landlords are trying to get their money back. I don't know if they're getting greedy again. I don't know, but rents are going up. And so that's one of the cons to renting. And then you don't build equity in your house. So when you own a home, and I'll go into that in a minute, you build equity. But when you're renting, you don't build that equity. You're building that equity for your landlord. And then you also don't get the tax breaks. So anytime you own property, you usually can take off the property tax and the interest that you paid. And depending on how much that is, it can make a substantial difference in your tax filings and your tax deductions every year. And then another pro of renting is you pay less upfront than if you were buying a home. Okay. Now let's look at the pros and cons of owning. A lot of times when you own, you have more stability because you know that you're locked into this space. As long as you pay your rent, pay your mortgage, as long as you pay your taxes, as long as you pay your insurance, as long as you're a responsible homeowner, you're locked in. So that helps create stability for you. But you are responsible for repairs. You're responsible for maintenance. You're responsible for upkeep. So if your furnace goes out and it's 0 degrees below, you're responsible for that. You're responsible for cutting the grass and so on and so forth. In some cases, it can be cheaper than renting. Not always, but in some cases it is. So that can be a pro for you as well. Like I said earlier, you do get those tax breaks when you're filing your taxes. So you can take off that interest and you can take off property tax. And the payments are typically fixed. Now, when I say fixed, it's fixed in terms of your landlord can't come in and say, hey, when your lease is up, we're raising your rent by $500. That doesn't happen. It can increase, however, when you're looking at your when you're looking at your insurance and your property taxes. So let's say your property tax goes up 1%, that's going to increase your mortgage. Or your insurance, maybe there's a rash of break-ins in your neighborhood or the neighborhood's kind of going down, your insurance can go up as well. So that's the only time your payment really changes, but for the most part, it's a fixed payment. You can customize, you can do whatever you want. If you want to redo your bathroom, if you want to paint a wall, if you want to add an accent wall, you're free to do that. It's a way to build wealth and you build equity. And so I'll get into that in a second, but it's a wealth building tool. You do have more responsibility when you own a home because there are so many things that you are responsible for, and it can be a little harder to move, especially if you don't want to buy a house and sell a house, then buy another house and sell a house. So those are some pros and cons of owning. Okay. Now, when you're looking at your situation, the first thing that you got to know is you have to do what's best for you. So I'm going to give you some ideas of if you should rent or if you should buy. Okay. Now, if you're planning to live in a space for at least 3 years, you probably want to consider renting because 3 years is not a long time. And usually when somebody says, I'm planning to be there 3 years, unless they're like, they're in that area for a purpose. Maybe they are a student or they're in a training program at work. That kind of situation, it may be more beneficial for you to rent in the long term. If you're working on your credit, maybe there are some things that you have to pay off. Maybe there are some debts that you want to get down before you purchase. You definitely want to do that in a renting space because that's going to free up some wiggle room in your budget. If you're saving money for your down payment, this is not as big of an issue as it used to be in the past. It used to be you had to put down 20% and that was it. But governments and lending institutions are becoming very lenient and more conscientious of people who don't have those huge chunks of cash to put down. Everybody doesn't have $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 to put down for a down payment. So you may need to save some money for your down payment, and you can do that while you're renting. Hey, Michelle. Hey, Alan. Welcome to Money Monday. If you're not good at budgeting and saving, you definitely want to stay in a renting space because when you are a homeowner, it's a whole nother ball game. If you don't have money saved to pay for those expensive emergency repairs, if you don't have the discipline yet to manage your money on a monthly and bi-weekly basis where you're really honing in on your spending and how you're allocating your money, what's going in and coming in and going out, then you definitely want to remain a renter until you can get that piece of your life under control. Because once you get a house, baby, they don't care what your situation is. They want their money. And then if you're not ready to pay a lot of money or have a lot of responsibility, you might want to keep renting because like I said, there are costs that go into owning a home and it can get very pricey. Now let's look at the other side of that. Let's say, you've been saving your money. You got maybe 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, however much, $1,000 saved. You have that money set aside. Then you may want to consider owning, right? Maybe you are ready for debt. You're like, okay, I know I can manage this. I already pay rent. I'm already managing that well. My money's going well. I'm ready to take on some new debt. This is the time for you to own a house. If you have secure employment, so you've been on your job at least 2 years, 5 years, and you're in your career field, this might be a good time for you to think about owning. Hey, Sharita, welcome to Money Monday. And if you're prepared for the responsibility, because like I said, it is a lot of responsibility. When things break, that's on you. When pipes bust, that's on you. When you need air conditioning and it's 100 degrees and you're in Arizona, that's on you. So if you're prepared for their responsibility and you're like, okay, I got this, that's nothing, blah, 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 I can do it. Absolutely, you're ready to own your own home. Hey, Squeaky, welcome to Money Monday. Now, let's look at the cost difference between renting and owning. So, let's say you're a renter, and you found a place, you like it. Okay, I want to move here. Typically, you'll have to put down your first and last month rent and a security deposit. So, for the sake of this argument, and I'm making this up, right? Let's say that your first, last month and security deposit is $2,500. Bam, that's down. Then your monthly rent is $1,000. Now, rents are going up. Chose $1,000 because, you can get something that's super low or you can get something that's super high. But just for the sake of this argument, we're going to say that your rent is $1,000. Your base rent, right, is $1,000. When you're talking about your parking spot and your dog and your utilities and all that, we're talking about strictly rent. Okay. Now, on the other hand, you're ready to buy a house. You find a house for $150,000. Your interest rate is, let's say, about 7% on a yearly basis. Okay. Let's say your down payment for the house can be anywhere from $1,000 if you get into a really good program on up to $50,000. Okay. But for the sake of the argument, we're going to say that your down payment is $2,500. So you're like, okay, this is what I have to put down. This is what I'm putting down. We're comparing apples to apples when it comes to renting and owning. And then you may have closing costs as well. Typically, when you're purchasing a home, you have closing costs. It can be $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, depending on the price of your home. A lot of times with closing costs, you'll see the seller place closing costs. That just means it's wrapped up in your loan and you're paying it. That's all it means. So maybe you put the $10,000 down. Maybe you didn't. For the sake of this argument, we're going to say you put it down. So we know that when you have a mortgage, your mortgage consists of principal and interest, taxes for your home, and insurance. So with all those three things or those four things in, your mortgage for this $150,000 home is $1,150. Okay, it's really $1,149, but we're going to say $1,150. So in 10 years, as a renter, you would have paid $120,000 in rent and $2,500 for your security deposit in your first and last month's rent. So you're looking at $122,500. As a homeowner, your mortgage would have cost you $137,888. What does it say? Okay. And then you're looking at another, let's say $1,200 for your down payment and your closing costs. So all in all, you would have spent a total of $150,000, $300,000. $300,000. Okay. Now that's a big difference. When you look at both of these cost summaries, what you have to know is when you're talking about renting, that's not including rent increases. That's not including any damages that you may have to the apartment. We're talking about rent only. So if your landlord goes up on your rent on year 2 and then again on year 3, year 4, we're not even considering that. We're just talking about a straight $1,000 in rent. When you're looking at that $137,000, almost $138,000 for owning a house, we're not talking about the tax breaks that you get on your taxes every year for the interest and the property tax that you paid. We're not talking about any repairs or any maintenance, any of that. We're talking about straight, this is what you paid on a monthly basis. This is how much it equaled up to. Okay. So we're looking at $122,500 and then $138,000. We're rounding up. After 10 years, you're ready to move, right? Your landlord comes to you and say, okay, thanks for making this $120,000 payments to us. We appreciate that. We have equity in our property now, thanks to you. And we keep your security deposit. So you don't get your $2,500 back. And we all know they be scamming. Hey, Natalie, welcome to Money Monday. Now, on the other hand, let's say that after 10 years, you have your house and you say, okay, I want to move, right? I'm ready to move. Maybe my family has outgrown this house. Maybe I'm relocating to another city. Maybe I'm moving to Costa Rica. I don't know. I'm ready to move. In 10 years, let's say that your house is worth $270,000. Now you paid $150 for it. It's now $270,000. I chose $270 because what we've seen in the past few years, especially since the pandemic, is houses were selling for crazy. Okay. So that's about an 80% return on your investment. In 10 years, let's say that you paid $75,000 in principal on your loan. So now your loan amount is $75,000. After you spend about $20,000 in selling costs, to get everything switched over. Maybe you did some repairs, whatever. You get a check for $175,000 with you owning your home, right? Because we take that 270, we subtract that $75,000 that you still owe on your loan, and then we subtract that $20,000 in selling costs. So that equals about $175,000. So you've recouped all of your money that you spent for the last 10 years on rent, probably all the money that you spent on maintenance, on repairs, all of that, you've recouped your money back. So I'll answer that in a second, Squeak. Let me get through this. Okay. Now, there are some exceptions to this process when you are living in a high state where you're in a high cost of living. Hawaii, California, New York, Seattle, those places, it's going to be very high to buy a house. You might even buy a house for a shack for $1 million out in California. That's 100% possible. So that's what you have to consider when you're living in those high cost states. Now, Squeaky asks, what about borrowing your money from your 401k plan? There are of course, pros and cons to borrowing money from your 401k. One of the pros is you do have that money as a down payment. And then typically, if you're taking a loan from your 401k, you're going to be paying that money back with interest, right? If you withdraw that money, sometimes they can charge you penalties and interest. They might not if you are using it for a primary residence, but you have to look at all of those pros and cons. And then something else that you have to consider if you are thinking about withdrawing money from your 401k is you're going to miss out on that investment opportunity. So let's say, for example, in your 401k, you have $50,000 worth of Apple stock. Okay. And Apple comes out with a new revolutionary device and it doubles their stock price. You just missed out on that money that you would have made. You've missed out on those returns that you would have made from that stock. So if you're thinking about doing that, you really have to weigh your options, think about your pros and cons. If that's your only option for a down payment, that's what you got to do, right? You got to do what you got to do. But really look at the overall picture if you're thinking about withdrawing or borrowing money from your 401k. Candy said, if at all possible, pay extra on the principal each month if possible when owning. So that's a great point, Candy. A lot of people pay more on their principal. They also do something where they split their payments. So let's say you have a payment that's due once a month and it's $1,000. They'll pay $500 one week and then $500 the next week. And what that does is that lowers your principal over time. Even though you're paying the same amount of money, you're not paying as much interest. And so that's lowering your principal over time. Okay. Now, some wealthy people will tell you, never buy a house. A house is a terrible investment. You should rent, blah, 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 blah. What I would say to that is, like I said, weigh your options. They may have reasons for telling you not to do that. Maybe they're bi-coastal. Maybe they're spending half their time on California, half their time in New York. Maybe they don't have a primary residence that they own, but they own 100 apartment buildings. So that's good advice, but take the advice and take what you need, right? Because it's going to have to apply to you. What I want to emphasize before I wrap up is do what's right for you. But always remember, they're not making any more land. We can build 1 million houses a year. We can build 1 billion houses a year, but there's only so much land. And then, what I also want to do is give you some motivation. You can actually buy a house within a year. If you are serious and you're ready to get started, you want to buy a house, you're like, okay, I'm ready to own, or maybe I want to do some things different. All it takes is a year. It doesn't take 5 years. It doesn't take 10 years. All you need is a solid year to buy a house. Okay. Now I'm wrapping up. I wrote an ebook a few years ago, I think 2 years ago. It's called So You Want to Buy a House ebook. I walk you through the steps of owning a home. If that's something you're interested in, click the link. The link is on here. You can download it. It's a very easy, very quick read. And you can get some more information. Maybe you are seasoned, maybe you're not, maybe you just want to see what the book is about. You can definitely download that here. My personal opinion is when it comes to renting versus owning is know yourself. First of all, know what you're capable of, what you want to tolerate, what you want to be bothered with. And I would always choose owning over renting. Sometimes it's easier to rent. We're renting now. There's nothing wrong with renting an apartment. There's nothing wrong with renting a condo, a townhouse, whatever it is. You have to do what works best for you. But in the long haul, I will always suggest owning, because you do get that equity back. And if I can get all my money back for the rent I paid for the last 10 years or the last 5 years, baby, I want my money. So I hope you guys enjoyed this Money Monday. I love you guys. Thank you for joining, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.